How are you feeling, Professor?
Okay, how about yourself?
Good.
Just getting over a cold. Otherwise, so trying to figure out how the, oh yeah, there it is. Participant menu. So how's the paper coming along? Good?
Yeah, I submitted it.
Okay. Great. Or not so great because I have about 50 papers to grade now. So I have my work cut out for me. It's a big class. Wording on. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about leadership, and your papers are due at midnight. I last time I mistakenly said 2 weeks, but then I emailed and said this week. So are there any questions about that, the due date or anything? So basically for the paper, what I want you to do is read the textbook chapter 12, a lot of stuff in the textbook, like a chapter on emotion. I think that was 4, if I'm not mistaken, is really good. And the chapter tonight is, you can really use the movie to analyze almost any of the theories, especially the contingency theories, including situational leadership and leader participation model, the shared leadership theory and followership theory. It's a lot of theories. You can apply any of those to 12 o'clock high. I found myself while I was reading the chapter thinking about how you can apply or test the theories in this chapter, and it's somewhat theoretical material out of it, but you can
Professor, I have a question before you start.
go ahead.
First, how you doing? And second, Professor, I forgot to submit the assignment. I know it's due. We have to submit at 7:30. But speaking about it,
It's
what is it?
due at midnight, so you still have some time.
I got you, because I just got off from work like 20 minutes ago. That's why. Thank you, though. Appreciate you.
No problem. So basically, you can think about many of these ideas, and as I'm going through some of them, I'll mention it. But sir, I think the question of whether, one interesting one that I've talked about through the years is whether Savage is charismatic. I think you could say pretty fairly that Savage is a transformational leader. He gives them reason to try to be successful, but I don't think you can really call him a charismatic leader, in part because he really falls down at offering a vision. You don't hear almost anywhere in that movie. In fact, I dare you to go to that movie. There are 2 points where the topic of vision is discussed, and I dare you to go back and identify where those 2 points are, because you really have to listen carefully to see anywhere in that movie where they talk about the vision of what they're trying to accomplish. And instead, it's all about here to get, there's more people coming in. It's all about execution, which is fine. I mean, that too can be viewed as a kind of charismatic leadership, but or rather transformational leadership, but it's not really of the charisma type. It's charisma is like how things are done. Transformational leadership is the content. And he was clearly engaging in transforming the unit without himself being likable or somebody they trusted. In fact, they hated him and they all wanted to leave initially, which is kind of the opposite of charisma. So I don't think you could call him charismatic, but he gave them a lot of reasons why they should try to be successful. And so transformational is a more accurate term. And I think you can apply like almost maybe half or 3/4 of the ideas in this chapter to the movie. So, basically, if you're still looking for a hypothesis to test against the movie, just read this chapter. I mean, it's like almost half the material is covered in that movie in some way. So we'll talk a little bit about it tonight and try to get to the bottom of what we mean by leadership. Basically, I'm not sure how practical a lot of this stuff is. Like, one thing, I think OB is great as a analytical tool, and for scholars, it's they do studies to try to get to the bottom of what they mean by something like leadership or what kind of leadership might work. I'm not sure how much of this material is actually usable in a day-to-day business setting. Although they do talk about contingency theories a lot. And the idea of a contingency theory is that you temper what you do to the situation. So it all depends on the situation. But it's so stylized and difficult to know when you're in a circumstance which of the situational factors is really at play. I think what these things do though is give you ideas, but you have to be imaginative. If you really digest the material and you really understand it, you might be able to, in some contexts, apply it in the real world. But I think it's going to be tough. It's not really a class in skills; it's more class in theory, which I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think it's as useful for you, to be honest, as a class in managerial skills would be. But in any case, the definition of leadership, you could say, is the ability to influence a group towards the achievement of a vision or a set of goals. And central to that is vision. You're trying to influence people to a certain end. There's no doubt that General Pritchett and Savage had a vision. In other words, they were, in a sense, entrepreneurs. They were trying to build an air force from nothing, and they had never done anything like this before, so it was all very new. And they certainly had an idea that they were going to build an air force, but that was not a clear vision. Savage does articulate a clear vision, but it's only on occasion. And I think the leadership would have been a lot more thorough and sophisticated, and the stress wouldn't have been as bad if they presented a vision. What Savage does say, which is taken out of the Code of the Samurai. If you ever see that movie by I forget the title of it, but basically, it's modeled after the Code of the Samurai. And if you look at that, the Bushido Code, you see early in it, they say, the samurai is already dead, and that's exactly what he says to them. Picture yourselves already dead. It's right out of the Code of the Samurai. So basically, he's trying to create in them a psyche of warriorship, if you will. I don't think that's a real word, but he's trying to make them think of themselves as warriors and transform them psychologically, which is in itself a very difficult thing. And of course, it's such as related to organizational culture and organizational transformation, because those things are closely linked to group psychology. But he doesn't ever say to them, like, this is what we are trying to accomplish. In 1 year, you will see X, and you are going to create this kind of transformation in the world, and this will be the outcome of what you do. He doesn't give them a lot of that, and I think that's a real weakness in his leadership style. Leaders, there's a distinction, and I think it's useful to keep this in mind. There's a distinction between managers and leaders. Leaders are people who excite others to achieve a vision or a set of goals. In contrast, a manager is someone who optimizes resources, possibly towards a set of goals, but it may not be. A good manager doesn't necessarily have to convey a vision, because what they're doing is on a much shorter term level than what a leader has to do. A manager is somebody who administers. So I would say if you look at the United States as a nation, the vision of the United States was stated by Jefferson and in the Declaration of Independence. And basically making it work required a lot of things that Jefferson himself was not capable of. He was capable of stating the vision. He was not a charismatic leader particularly, but he had the capacity for great vision. Unlike Hamilton, who was not a man of vision, but was a great executive, a great executor. He could execute things greatly. And so Hamilton, of course, was the first Secretary of the Treasury, and he created the context which made for a strong central state. Not personally, that's not my favorite idea that there's a strong central state, but that's what he did. And he made the government very, very ultimately very powerful. And I think part of the reason we've had a lot of excitement, there's a play, as you probably know, on Broadway about Hamilton, and he was unquestionably a genius, originally from the country of Nevis, and a good leader. That was why he became important. He was an immigrant, and he was incredibly bright, and he had volunteered to organize a troupe in Manhattan. And he did, when Washington came to review it, he was so impressed that he appointed Hamilton to be his aide. That's how Hamilton rose to national prominence, and I'm sure he would have been anyway, because he was also a great genius at business. Two institutions that he founded in New York still exist, which in itself is amazing, given that he lived 240 years ago. One of them is the Bank of New York, which is now part of another bank. Another bank took it over, PNC, I think it is, and also the New York Post, which he founded centuries ago. Basically, he was a great manager, but what he really did for the country was execution. Jefferson was not capable of that, and they didn't get along. In fact, Jefferson was ultimately murdered by Hamilton's vice president. That's Aaron Burr, but that's another story. So anyway, not all leaders are managers, and not all managers are leaders. But I think Bill Gates is a great example of somebody who combined the two. He had like incredible vision, and he was able to build Microsoft. I've heard he was a very unpleasant person and not nice to work for, and people left him because of that. But still, he was successful at executing. Steve Jobs, another one from the early PC era, was also a great visionary, but was not that good at managing, and was in fact removed from Apple in the 1980s for a number of years. He was replaced by a CEO from Pepsi Cola, and Apple was floundering, and then Jobs came back, and with his incredible vision created what we see today with the iPhone. I'll never forget, like around 2002 or so, the shares of Apple were selling at $8 a share, and they've gone up like 500-fold since then. And basically, my late wife's masseuse was a psychic, and he came up one day and he said, "Buy Apple," and I said, he's out of his mind. I didn't do it, and now I know to listen to psychics from now on. But basically, that was, a lot of that was the vision of Steve Jobs. He was amazing. So, the two can overlap as they do in Gates, but they can also not overlap. And when we look at theories of leadership as to, what makes leadership successful, one of them is the idea that there are certain traits or psychological patterns that are long-term that leaders have and people who aren't leaders have less of. One of these, it's been studied to death, and they've come up with some mild findings, but they're not like stuff you can really use. It's more, just patterns of leaders. And so part of it is probably that the situation contributes to the success or failure of a leader. So, when a situation is conducive to great leadership, you have it, and when India wants to be free of Great Britain, a leader like Mahatma Gandhi is kind of appears. Was this due to Gandhi's great personality and amazing spirituality and attributes, or was it due to the situation? Well, it's probably a combination, and so you can't always take leadership out of context. So and the same thing, you think of these other guys like Julius Caesar was one, became kind of the dictator of Rome briefly, and then was murdered, of course. And a student in my other class was telling me he'd studied about the battles of Caesar and the different tactics. And Caesar was unquestionably a military genius, but the thing is, would Caesar, with his personality, have possibly been a leader in our world? And the answer is probably not. That type of personality probably wouldn't be that well adjusted, if it could exist at all, in the United States of this time. So, it's like, when you talk about different cultures, part of that is different time periods constitute different cultures, and if you study a classical language, such as classical Greek or ancient Sanskrit or ancient Chinese, you see huge differences in the thought processes of these ancient peoples compared to ours. And just from that exercise, you learn a great deal about ourselves by seeing how different people can think, and the way that they approach things like temporality and space and possibility and creativity and all kinds of things. I was somewhat astonished. Someone in the discussion board, which I greatly enjoyed your remarks about the social dilemma. I have to say, I was surprised about one thing, that a lot of people thought you could learn more from social media than you can from books. But then, I was talking about it with some students today, and I told them about the discussion, but they weren't in this class. And what they said is true, and I didn't quite get that, which is that you learn different stuff from social media than you do from books. It's like, you have a boss, and your boss teaches you certain things about how to deal with the company. You don't get that from books, and like the same thing with social media. It could fit how to make a salmon croquette, or how to fix your car or something like that. You can get that very nicely from videos on the social media and things like that, which you can't get from books. But what I was thinking was a totally different kind of knowledge, which was like academic or theoretical knowledge. And that's what I usually work with. If I have to fix my car, forget it. I don't even think of doing that. I take it, right to someone who knows how. But basically, but I'm not invalidating that kind of knowledge. That's like really important types of knowledge here in that category. But it's a different kind of knowledge, really. But I was surprised that someone said that they don't want to learn from books written in another time. And I think that's wrong. I think there's something missing in your education if you think that, because it's true they had different values and different kinds of discrimination. But I mean, it's like saying, can you learn something from reading Karl Marx, whom I personally think very little of? And I would say, yes, I can learn stuff from Karl Marx. I think he was wrong about almost everything, but I can still learn from him. But the thing is if you say you'll read Karl Marx, what you have to also say is that Karl Marx's social theories killed 10 times the number of people that racism killed. This is statistically true. So, I mean, if you're willing to live with the bloodshed and mass murder of Marxists, I don't know why you would be dainty about any other crime, because the worst crimes in history were committed by Karl Marx's followers. So basically, I think you can learn from other eras, and I think you can learn from other civilizations, including, the ancient Chinese, who, the first emperor of China is said to have buried the scholars alive. He buried the scholars alive, and there are countless examples of this throughout history. But does that mean you don't read Sun Tzu or you don't read Confucius because of that? I think that's a silly kind of way of thinking. And the same thing, someone said that they wouldn't read Adam Smith because there was racism in the time of Adam Smith. Is a complete non sequitur. And I know that the education system of today leads people to come to that kind of argument, but this is not education. I'm sorry. If you've been taught this, you've been cheated. Seriously. This is not education. It's the opposite of education, what education is supposed to be. And the simple truth is that the people advocating these points of view are the same ones who believe in Karl Marx, who's killed more people than anyone else. So I'll leave it at that. So basically, leaders have the traits of the three big five. Remember the big five personality traits: neuroticism, extroversion, agreeability, neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeability, and conscientiousness. The leaders have low neuroticism, high agreeability, and high conscientiousness. Okay, so basically, these are useful things to know. They're extroverts, they have openness, and they're conscientious. Okay, not agreeability, although I would think they do have agreeability, but they're not. I was wrong about that. Okay, so extroverts, conscientious, openness. Okay, that's what leaders have. They tend to be bold, they tend to be assertive, they have strong personalities, they're, in other words, proactive. So they have high proactivity. They also have mid-range scores on psychopathy. However, I don't really believe that you can treat psychopathy as a nuanced range. I think it's something that's yes or no, more than like someone has it more and someone has it less. There's a great book by Babiak and Hare called Snakes and Suits, which I highly recommend. It's about corporate psychopaths. And a big share of people in business are psychopaths. There's no question. They think Babiak and Hare, and in case you haven't heard of them, Robert Hare became known to the national audience in the third to last episode of The Sopranos, when he's quoted in a dinner of a bunch of Dr. Melfi's colleagues, and they're talking about why Tony Soprano can't be treated with psychotherapy, which is what Dr. Melfi was trying to do throughout the series. And they mentioned Robert Hare, who has written extensively on psychopathy. So basically, Babiak and Hare published a piece where they found that they're 8% of the executive population, and in the general population, they're 3%. So basically, they're outsized. It's rare in social science that you get like differences of that magnitude, a threefold difference. So it's big, and basically, your book says that they have mid-range psychopathic, and this is like using a more scaled kind of measure. They also have a great deal of emotional intelligence, and they specifically have empathy. Now, the trouble is with that I think, I think you can learn a lot from Shakespeare about leadership. And two of the really great Shakespearean plays that concern leadership are Richard III and Henry V. There's both are filled with like opposite kinds of leaders. Richard III being like someone who murdered, if you go to England and you go to the Tower of London, the princes he murdered are buried, they think they're buried in there and so on. And, he killed a number of people to get to the kingship. He was, probably a full-blown psychopath. It's quite likely. And the opposite, or at least as depicted by Shakespeare, I'm not enough of a historian of that period to know a lot about Henry V, but he's depicted as the opposite. So he cares greatly about his troops, and he wants to be honest. Shakespeare wrote a trilogy about him: Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and Henry V. And so it shows this Prince Hal, who's a juvenile delinquent, who hangs out with this crooked alcoholic named Falstaff, who, like all the audiences loved him, and basically, and then matures into this great king. And so they show him in the Henry V, early in the play, he hangs several of his friends from the Falstaff days. He hangs them for stealing, and he's undeterred by that they knew him. They come walking up, and they're caught, and he sees who they are, and he knows his job is to hang them. He's got to hang them, and he does. And it kind of tells everyone this is a different person, that he was transformed by his position. And so, and what it basically says is that he's tricked into invading France, and he's put in this very difficult position, and it's a little bit like 12 o'clock high, and he's up against insurmountable odds, and he's got to fight a much larger French army, and he's afraid he's going to lose. And what he basically does is he disguises himself so people won't lie to him, and then he goes around the camp asking people about what their feelings were, and then he tries to motivate them in a very famous speech at Agincourt, where he talks about how they're a band of brothers and so on. If we have time, maybe I'll play it for you. I'll send you the link at least. And it's a wonderful speech that's still quoted to this day. And so basically the idea is that you get to know your employees and you motivate them directly. And basically this is the kind of proactivity that indeed characterizes leadership, and also provides, I think, in this speech, provides a vision for how to succeed, and for how his army should think of themselves, that they would all be his brothers, the king's brothers, and they would all fight like kings. And so he gives this incredible speech that they're going to be remembered throughout history and so on. And if you compare that to the speech in 12 o'clock high, it's a lot different. So in other words, it's kind of the difference between an initiating structure leader, or task-oriented leader like Savage, and a consideration leader like Henry V. They're two different kinds of leaders. So the idea is that initiating structure or consideration are two alternative approaches to leadership. So in initiating structure, it's like another word for it would be task orientation. The leader is oriented toward the task, and it's the extent to which a leader defines and structures their role and those of their followers to facilitate goal attainment. So it's all about training. It's all about building the organization. It's all about assigning roles. It's all about discipline. And so they try to organize work, focus on work relationships, such as when Savage reassigns roommates. It's all about goals. And as I say, they don't really talk a lot directly about goals, but then at the end of the movie, you see the one war scene where they actually, those are films of real bombing runs by the European American Air Force at that time. And and you see what the goal was, which was like total destruction of the enemy. And this was in fact the aim of Curtis LeMay, who himself was probably a bit of a psychopath. When you watch the movie The Fog of War, which you're going to do a little later in the semester, Robert McNamara describes how LeMay 20 years later or so, 15 years later, so wanted to nuke Hanoi. He actually wanted to nuke Hanoi, just take it, not Hanoi, I'm sorry. Well, he wanted that too, but I meant to say nuke Havana. He wanted to nuke Cuba. He had no qualms about it at all. And this is the kind of person that does well as a military commander. It's they have their role in the world, but you don't want them put in charge of the final decision. But in any case, initiating structure where the leader defines the structure, the work relationships and goals. They assign tasks, set standards, emphasize deadlines. This is the kind of thing that Savage was excellent at. Okay, he was task oriented. Whereas the consideration leader is one who works to establish relationships characterized by trust, emphasizes respect for employees, regard for their feelings, how considerate is the person. And I think in that you can see Keith Davenport, the first guy. He was a consideration leader, and Savage was or is, however you want to talk about the literature, initiating structure or task-oriented leader. Now, Fred Fiedler took these ideas and transformed them into a contingency model. And Fiedler's contingency model argues that whether you use the initiating structure or the consideration approach, or whether it should be used, not do you use, should be used, is that whether you use one or the other depends on a match between the environment and the leader, and the degree to which the situation calls for a certain kind of leader, the right leader needs to be put in place. So in other words, Fiedler didn't think that you could change. He didn't think you could go from being Savage to Davenport or from Savage to Henry V. He didn't think that. He thought you were born as a certain type, that you were either more of a task-oriented leader or more of a relations-oriented leader, more initiating structure, more of consideration. So basically what he said is that whether you use one kind of leadership or the other depends on your situation, whether it's desirable to have one type of leader or the other. So the three things that define the situation, according to Fiedler, are leader-member relations, how well they get along, task structure or difficulty, and position power. Now, what you see in 12 O'Clock High is obviously a difficult situation. It's not just because they were actually being killed, something far beyond most business settings, but also because the leader-member relations that Savage faced were bad. He had removed Davenport, or his boss had removed Davenport and replaced Davenport with him. He was not popular. He was obviously aggressive and demanding, and they didn't like that. They felt they were being imposed on, which is, understandable. And so basically, he had a very difficult situation. The task, structure, or difficulty was, you can't really imagine a worse situation there. So, I mean, the extremity of it is, we can't really get our minds around it totally. It's just a movie. but being in that role where you're next to someone whose brain gets blown out of his head, this is like, this is not something this is not an easy task. And lastly, although as a commander in the military, he had considerable position power, it was also true that the group was trying to subvert him and brought in an outside review. And so in a way, he didn't have such great position power either. So what Fiedler says is that if there's a very difficult, if the situation is bad or the situation is really easy. So like if you're an administrator in a nursery school or something, or you run a government agency, it's a very easy thing to do. There's little market risk, everything's under control. In both those situations, you need a task-oriented leader. You need an initiating structure person. You focus purely on the task, on building an organization. In the case where you have moderate difficulty, so there's moderate degrees of these variables, or there's a lot of one and very little of the others, you have there it's more typical business situation, and there you need good interpersonal skills. You need a leader who's very good at consideration. A great book from about 20 years ago is by Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. I highly recommend it. And what he did, he looked at
Good to what?
Good to Great. Here, I'll put it on the yes, someone said Hamilton was murdered by Burr. That is absolutely correct. That's what I said. Hamilton was murdered by Jefferson's vice president, who was Aaron Burr. He was the vice president at that time. Can you imagine that a vice president kills a former secretary of the Treasury in a duel? That's like, it was a different world, then, totally different world. So anyway, going back to Jim Collins. I'm trying to put the whiteboard on the screen. Okay, so you see the whiteboard, I hope. But I've got this other thing here. Hold on. So basically, let me close this chat. So, oh, this is the whiteboard. All right. So basically, Jim Collins, just so you see it, Jim Collins, Good to Great, a true business classic. It's really eye-opening, because what he did basically was he identified the top performing companies over the long term in the S&P 500. And so he identified a few companies that had consistently outperformed all the others. And he then tried to identify what caused these companies to outperform. And what he came up with ultimately was the one variable that distinguished them from their competitors was the leadership. And in particular, that the executives of these companies were what your textbook calls servant leaders. I don't recall him using that. I don't recall his using that term, but they were servant leaders. That, in other words, they focused on the needs of their employees. And when he interviewed the employees, the people that knew the executive that worked directly for them, they said the executive is amazing. The person cares endlessly about us. We've never worked for anyone like this. Our success is totally due to this person. But when he interviewed the boss, when he interviewed the executive, what the executive said, and this will tell you a lot. The executive said, you know, I am like the luckiest executive in the history of the world, because like I was just given the best group of people. I haven't had to do a thing. It was totally due. The success of this organization is totally due to them. Okay, so you have a picture of a person who is selfless and not consumed with their ego and not self-promoting. So it was the exact reverse of the, back in the early 2000s, they had the era of the executive superstar. And they had these guys like Jack Welch who claimed to be these great executives. And half of them were, all they were doing was falsifying the accounting records. You know, one of them was Kenneth Lay and Jeff Skilling of Enron, who ended up in jail. But I mean, even Jack Welch, who never really got prosecuted, you know, he had boosted the share price 150 times. And what happened to GE after he left was a steady decline. He didn't build anything of any lasting value. And so these executive superstars with the big egos, you know, a lot of their companies went bankrupt and other stuff like that, really didn't accomplish a lot. Whereas these other guys who are much quieter and their companies aren't maybe as famous as GE was at that time, have outperformed GE dramatically over the long haul. Okay, so your book in a group of theories that it goes into, I think does, it's somewhat dense material. And I know you guys get bored, a lot of you guys get bored with books, but if you can tough it out and read through it, you will be able to apply these ideas to the movie. You can test almost all of them to the movie. I was reading it this morning and I was like, playing around with it in my mind, like how does Savage exemplify this or not? And one of them, situational leadership theory by Hersey and Blanchard, is another contingency model like the Fiedler theory, which says it depends, what the leadership style depends on the situation. So a lot of it is the follower's readiness to perform a given task. So what they're looking at is like whether employees are competent and whether employees are motivated. Okay, that's like the two variables. And I think those are both obviously the key question in many organizations. If you have competent, motivated people, you're going to be successful. If you have competent people, but they hate you, then then you're getting into a little trouble. So basically what they say is there's four combinations where the followers are not competent, but they're willing. And that's where you tell them what to do and you direct them. Where the followers are competent, but not committed. So they know how to do the job, but they're not motivated. You sell and coach. So you get them to try to do a good job. Where the followers are competent, but not totally committed, which I think is the case in our movie, 12 O'Clock High. There you want to be more participating and supporting. But that was not what Savage did. Savage did more the selling and coaching, where he tried to convince them to become, and maybe that was because they weren't that competent. Maybe I'm wrong that the third one is really relevant. It might have been the second one. And he starts out by telling them, we'll start out with practice missions because maybe it's your flying. And so, this is the usual initiating structure mentality that we're going to work on the task. We're going to do it right. We're going to learn how to do it. You can never go wrong with that. The thing is, in a lot of contexts, the relationships are more important than the task. How you do it is less important than whether you get along with each other. A lot depends. And the final one is delegating, where the followers are competent and committed. There, the manager can let things go. Another kind of contingency theory is called the follower contingency theories. And basically, your book talks about a few of them, and I think they're all highly relevant to 12 O'Clock High. First of all, the leader participation model, which is that the leaders should determine the extent to which they need to get the employees to share responsibility. Okay, so basically the leader thinks about, to what degree am I going to train people to some degree to become leaders? And I think you see this in 12 O'Clock High. He talks about it several times, that he needs to comb the group for leaders. He can't decide who's ready for leadership. And he's trying to get them to think more and more like leaders. So basically, the shared leadership theory goes a little further, and it argues that leadership is an emergent state, where, meaning, in other words, it transcends the group, where leadership roles are distributed across the organization and still are capable, and people are capable of influencing each other. And so leadership becomes a collective. I don't think that totally fit the movie. I think it kind of falls down a little with this story, but I think at the same time, what he needed was for that to happen. And I think at the end, when he has his nervous breakdown, I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone, you should have seen it by now. When he has his nervous breakdown and he looks at Gately and he says, Gately says to him, who should lead? And he says, Gately should lead. He's not even aware that he's talking to Gately. And, he's reached a point where he has created leaders, where he was able to take someone who never flew a mission and ended up flying a mission in severe pain, and is ready to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to achieve the goal. And so I think in a way this approach is kind of present in the movie. And the last one says that the followership theory says that followers put the leader's vision into practice. And it emphasizes the perception and desirable traits like industriousness, enthusiasm, and engaging in organizational citizenship behaviors are what can create a leader, because the followers are so good. And that's definitely part of what the movie's about. And I think part of his breakdown is that as they grew and became the kind of flyers he wanted, he became attached to them, and that, it's natural, it's human nature to, you're working with people, and seeing them die like that is just too much for anyone. So basically, poor followers. What makes a good follower? They're industrious, enthusiastic, engage in organizational citizenship behaviors, are competent. Poor followers have the opposite. They are insubordinate, they are incompetent, they conform to what the boss wants, they don't ask questions. Okay, another question, and this is directly relevant to the film. What do you do to lead in a difficult situation in a time of crisis? Which I think is kind of the story of 12 O'Clock High. And what your textbook says is that successful historical leadership is often transactional. So basically, that's the approach that Savage takes. That, in other words, he says, we have to stick together, we have to improve, and if we improve, then we'll be more likely to survive. But you have to accept the reality that we might die. And once you accept that, we can then improve the odds by flying in formation and flying competently, and thinking about the group. So now, what your book also says is something very interesting, that charismatic leadership can be visionary or crisis responding. And as I said, Savage was definitely not visionary, but he definitely was crisis responding. So I think this theory is actually borne out in the movie. That, in other words, in many ways, people often say Savage is charismatic because I think he's played by Gregory Peck, who is like, a great actor, incredibly good looking. He's actually named, if you look it up on the web, AFI's American Film Institute's 100 Best Heroes and Villains of All Time. Gregory Peck comes in at #1, the best hero of all time for To Kill a Mockingbird, the role of Atticus Finch. You don't get to be in that without being personally charismatic. So basically what I'm saying is that Gregory Peck is charismatic. I don't know that Savage was supposed to be that charismatic, but I think what the film shows is that he fails to present a vision, but he does present a plan of action. He is crisis responsive, and he justifies his action by communicating effective results. He flies when everyone else was told to turn back, and he tells them to go ahead, and he risks a lot, but they make the run when all the other units turn back, and Pritchett is about to cut his head off, and he says, look, I got these guys, I showed these guys they can do something special. Give them a commendation, give me a commendation. I won't ask for a commendation for myself, but give them a commendation because they did it where no one else could. And so he's trying to give them feedback to show that they can succeed in this time of crisis. So basically, this is like amazing stuff. It's like, this is what makes like really great leaders, these kind of taking risks like that, and, proving to people they can be great successes. Sometimes it might not work. And, that's what Pritchard was upset about, and rightly so. But basically, taking that kind of risk is a sign of really good leadership. The idea of leader-member exchange theory is that there are always going to be some preferred members of a group. Now, you can apply that to 12 o'clock high too. And you might say, well, who are the in people in that group? And I think, it's fairly obvious. He starts out, what was his name, with the guy he's sitting at the bar, and
Doc.
what's his name again?
Doc Kaiser.
Not the doctor, the pilot who's at the bar, and he says, I'd rather buy my own drink. And then the next scene, he appoints him to be the air exec after that. And basically, he's saying, I respect people who have their own minds. I respect people who are tough, and so so it starts out with this guy, certainly Major Stonewall, certainly Bishop. So in other words, people who show that they're talented, people who show up, and then who's in the out group, obviously Gately. He's ticked off. Gately got drunk. He left the base. He didn't fly any missions. He wasn't doing his job. And then when he proves himself by flying with a fractured spine, he suddenly changes completely. Now Gately's in the in group, and he says to the nurse, he's something special. So basically, this kind of in-group and out-group thing is what leader-member exchange theory concerns. And it says basically that subordinates with in-group status have higher performance ratings, less turnover, and greater job satisfaction, and that leaders and followers build social capital, they develop high-quality relationships. And the thing is, it only works if the leader picks for the in-group the best performers. So the in-group should be the people who perform. If you hit a lot of home runs, you're in the in-group. If you don't, if you strike out every time and you never get a hit, then you're in the out group. And so followers within group status, by definition, have better performance ratings, have more organizational citizenship behavior, engage in fewer deviant work behaviors, fewer counterproductive work behaviors, they report more satisfaction, and they speak up more and disagree with the boss more. Okay, so they're not afraid to disagree because they are high performers. All right, now I have to say, there are some bosses who are just not like that. You know, if you disagree with them, you might as well hand in your resignation. So you have to be careful when you disagree with someone. You have to know what they're like. Not all bosses are good bosses. There are a lot of bad bosses out there. Okay, leader-member exchange theory falls down if the leader plays favorites. So if they arbitrarily pick pets for one reason or another, and they reward people who don't perform, then it just results in everybody being angry at the company. Okay. Charismatic leaders. Followers make attributions of heroic or extraordinary leadership ability.
Professor,
Yes.
as a follower, if you're going through what you just described, like some managers going through their random pet selection, what's the best way of surviving through that kind of company from an OB perspective?
So what kind of like if they're playing politics a lot?
Yeah, they're basically just picking random favorites, not based on performance. As a worker, as a follower, how do you best survive through that company without getting?
All right, so I would say do your best, try to suck up to the boss. There's a lot of political tactics you can use in dealing with a boss that can win them over. One of them is called mirroring. Have I discussed that at all? The idea of mirroring is that you adopt the behavior patterns of the boss. Okay, so like if the boss is a sports fan, you become a sports fan. If the boss, you can take it so far, like there are people in the corporate world who do this. Like if the boss is driving a certain kind of car, let's say the boss has a BMW, so you get a BMW. You know, and you do a lot of stuff that the boss does, and you try to understand them, you try to mirror them. You know, you try to adopt traits that they have. People like people who are like themselves. So if the person is a narrow, you're sort of a small-minded political type, the way to handle them is by doing the things that they do, mirroring. Okay, this is related to a technique in hypnosis where the hypnotist adopts the same breathing and
It makes people
posture.
feel comfortable.
What's that, Karina?
I said it makes people feel comfortable.
Yes, yes. So if you'd study a set of ideas called neuro-linguistic programming, which is used in sales a great deal, and it's related to hypnotism also. One of the things they'll talk about is this kind of mirroring where you adopt the same language and breathing patterns and posture. So if the boss is sitting back, you sit back. If the boss is breathing in a certain way, you breathe in the same way. You don't, of course, you don't let them realize. You better not let them realize what you're doing, because if they figure it out, then you get into a lot of trouble. So basically, but you mirror what they're doing, and then you are able to influence them. So I once heard a lecture by this guy who was experienced with neuro-linguistic programming. And he said he once stood in an elevator with someone and he started to adopt all their mannerisms, breathing, posture, and so on. And then suddenly he fell back and the other person fell back. I don't know how far you can take it. It's not something I've mastered, but it's a fascinating literature. And so like this idea of mirroring is very powerful. There's a great book. It's probably out of print now, but it was written about 30 years ago. It's by a guy named Dubrin, D-U-B-R-I-N. and it's called Winning Office Politics, a guide for the 90s. So I mean, it's old, but the thing is, I don't think that changes. Is some things change, other things never change. That never changes. So basically, he says stuff like what you do in a company. If you're in a company, you look for a guy who knew the boss when, so they started out together, but they didn't move up like the head guy did. So they're still at a somewhat lower level, but they're still really friendly with the boss. They knew them when they started out. And so they're easy to have access to. So you talk to them and you try to win them over. And if you do, then when they talk to the boss, they'll mention you. You see what I mean? So basically, he talks about a lot of tricks like that. When I worked for J&J, I worked for J&J in the early 80s. And so it was a very long time ago, 40 years. There was a guy there who was a barber. There was a corporate barber in the headquarters. And basically what the guy did was, he was there because if the executives are up all night and they have a TV appearance the next day or something like that, he's there to get them cleaned up and so on. And, occasionally Jim Burke might be on television or might have a meeting with a head of state or something important. And so, you're talking a big corporation of international stature. It's, so basically it was there for that, but, most of the time he didn't have anything to do. So you could make an appointment to see him. And so I did. And, if I had stayed there, I realized basically, if you become friendly with him, he knows every top executive in the company. So if you become friendly with him, your name will become circulated throughout. So there are these certain influencers that they're low level and they're sort of part of the woodwork, but they have huge ramifications and power. Even though maybe they don't have a lot of authority, their influence is way beyond what their job title is. And so if you can find those people and then develop relationships with them, that's a way to win over. So I hope a couple of those ideas are good. There's a lot more that we could talk about with that. So I think there are definitely ways to play politics. There was a labor negotiator at J&J named Bob Margadana. He's a great guy, one of my favorite people I ever met in business. And basically we went out a couple of times, we went for walks and stuff, and the labor people were always friendly to me. And we went for a long walk, and he told me that he had a labor negotiation with one of the unions that represented one of the plants there. And he told me that whenever he goes to the offices, he casually mentions to some assistant or somebody, he says, he's negotiating with a guy named Alan. So, I'm just making this up. So he goes to some assistant and somebody who says, God, how did you get a boss as talented as Alan? He's absolutely amazing. I've been negotiating with him for a long time, never met a nicer guy. And then inevitably that kind of remark gets circulated back to the person that made it, to the person that it's about, I mean. And so when somebody says, wow, somebody really likes you, that has a lot more impact than if you compliment someone directly. And so, there are a lot of techniques like that you can use to flatter people and get them on your side. I have to say this, I never heard of anyone fired because they flattered somebody, but I've heard of people who came up with a solution to a problem and it irritated the political power brokers in the company and they got fired. Okay, so you can be fired. I say it's much more likely to be fired for coming up with the right answer than for unnecessarily flattering somebody. Okay, but you want to be too obvious about it. As the neuro-linguistic programming guy said, a tactic known is a tactic blown. Okay, so you don't want to be obvious when you do stuff like that, but you want to be careful not to get caught. But if you can do it without getting caught, these tactics can have huge effects. And that's where, political players do tend to win out in large companies. In smaller businesses, it's different. If you're an entrepreneur, it's a little different. But there, you're dealing with the customers. So, it's basically you're playing political games with the customers. I just saw this series last night on HBO called White Lotus. Well worth watching. Great acting and stuff. And one of the storylines is that the hotel manager has this running feud with a guest who's from a very influential family. They don't tell you who it is. It doesn't really matter. But he owns the world. His family is like some powerful group people, and the manager of the hotel is annoyed that he keeps making demands on him, and they get into a fight. And I won't tell you where it leads because you might want to see the series, but basically, it's not the wise thing to do. All right, you don't get into tiffs with powerful people. You don't want to do that. Basically, you want to do the opposite. So you do the extra stuff for them, and that's how you curry favor with the powerful. You might say, well, isn't this disgusting? You should treat people the same, no matter what their position is. And I agree, but I think there's a difference between should and what works. Everything in corporate America is political. In government, everything is political. So, you have to do what works. You can't do what is right all the time. And that's why, they give these executive psychopathy tests, and they come up not very low, because to get along with people, you have to be a bit of a psychopath. You can't tell the truth all the time. It's like that movie Liar Liar with Jim Carrey. He's someone casts a spell on him that he has to tell the truth all the time, and it gets him into endless trouble. You're talking to your professor and you tell them what you really think of them, something like that. It's not the best idea to be honest with everybody. So it's just an extension of that, really. So those are some ideas with how to handle a political boss. So anyway,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So anyway, the full range leadership model talks about like different levels of intervention. So different degrees of how strong the leader is. So the weakest is laissez-faire leadership, which is passive, do nothing. A stronger level is transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is where leaders guide their followers, and this includes stuff like management by exception and contingent rewards or pay per performance. But the leaders give some advice, they give rewards, but they don't engage the followers that much. Transformational leadership is more like, I think what Savage has. You build on transactional leadership, you give the rewards, you give the structure, but you do effort beyond that. You encourage organizational citizenship behavior. You give people a picture of what it is they're trying to accomplish. It works well because it promotes more positive emotions. It motivates people. It leads to identification with the leader. It improves the quality of exchange relationships. And one thing you could do is ask yourself, was Savage a transformational leader? I mean, that could be your whole paper right there, that one point. Yeah, of course, you could also apply any of the other ones. Was he charismatic? Was he, to what extent were there in groups and out groups? To what extent did he use one of the follower contingency models, or did followership theory apply? All of those are useful models. a higher level than transformational leadership is individualized consideration, where there's a vision and a sense of mission, and you provide a vision. I don't think he really reached that. He didn't give a lot. I'm not saying he didn't have a vision. As I say, I dare you to tell me where he presented the vision. There was 2 points in the movie. One was not by him, one was by Pritchett, and one was by him. And so there were only 2 points and only one by Savage. And so basically there wasn't a lot of vision being provided. The 5th level is intellectual stimulation, where the leader communicates high expectations, uses symbols to focus efforts, and expresses important purposes in simple ways. Basically, this is, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, this is what Jefferson did in the first couple of paragraphs in the famous beginning of the Declaration of Independence. So, if I look at the Declaration of Independence, no, I don't want Wikipedia, I just wanted the text of it. I keep getting the same thing. I'm just looking for the text of it. So basically what the tell here is, so the second part of it is like a preamble. And then here, let me put this on the screen. So basically, if you look at this, you look at this text. I have trouble with this little laptop. It's not my favorite computer. I'm down in the city. My regular computer is up in my house. Darn. Doesn't want to. Okay, so what it says here, maybe I can make it a little larger, is okay. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So basically, this is a vision of America, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The very powerful statement in just a few words that basically creates a whole vision of equality that didn't exist at that time, of course, but was then magnified. And much of our expectations today come from that initial vision of Jefferson. And so basically it's the vision. It's not necessarily the reality. You don't have a vision because you've got the reality. You have a vision because you don't have the reality. And so he presents this vision, which then becomes implemented and transformational for hundreds of years for, republic. And so basically, that's the idea of intellectual stimulation and the idea of communicating high expectations using symbols to focus efforts and expressing purposes in simple ways. All right, so basically what you can say is that transformational and transactional leadership are not at odds. Okay, I think Fiedler was incorrect about that it requires two different people, the task-oriented and the relations-oriented. I think basically the transformational and the transactional leadership styles complement each other and work well together. Now, your book talks about a number of other important leadership concepts. Among them, authentic leadership. Leaders who are anchored by principles, who know what's important, who predicate, who are able to be truthful, listen to others, and display their true selves. So basically, this idea of authentic leadership results in great group performance, organizational citizenship behavior, sound leader-member exchanges, where the in-groups are the talented ones, satisfaction, trust in the leader, high rating of leader effectiveness by the followers, positive follower attitudes. All this stuff comes from this kind of authentic leadership. And so basically what this is saying is that great leadership requires honesty, and it requires a great deal of integrity and ethics. And many years ago, the CEO of what was then New Jersey Telephone, now I guess it would be called AT&T, it was part of AT&T, Chester Barnard wrote a book called The Functions of the Executive, and he created in many aspects of what's now the field of OB. And in that book, he talks about, in the very end of the book, he says, what really is the function of the executive? You know, he talks about stuff that we've been talking about, the role of motivation, the role of incentives, the role of leadership. And in the end, he says, well, what really is the function of the executive? And he basically says, executives create moral codes, that they create moral codes for their members, that their members have to believe in and apply over and above the alternative moral codes that rule their lives. So if you are somebody who's a normal person, you have patriotism, you have religion, you have a belief in certain principles, whatever they are, and on and on. And so you have all these different moral codes. And what he says is that the great executive can raise the employee to the morality of the company. And so they're more aware of that morality than of any other. Now, this can be dangerous. You know, so in other words, this is basically what Savage was saying. He's saying, you guys need to think of yourselves as warriors. You need to think of yourselves as committed to the 9/18th. And so basically, this kind of transformation of moral belief is what Chester Barnard thought was the function of the executive. Now, how many executives actually do this? Probably only a handful, but I think an executive who can be called authentic is that type of leader. So that would be the Savage type of leader, I think. Some leaders are abrasive. Okay, not all leaders are good. 76% of respondents to a monster.com survey indicated that they have a toxic or abusive supervisor. So all these idealized discussions of leadership that I've been spending the last hour and a half on often go up in smoke when you get some a-hole as your boss. I hate to say it, excuse the language. So basically, people with negative worldviews are more likely to say their supervisors are abusive. So people who think positive, who are optimists, will see the glass half full rather than half empty. Abusive supervisors, of course, tend to be narcissistic. You know, the great Christopher Lasch wrote The Age of Narcissism in the 1970s. And I don't think he could have imagined the explosion in narcissism since the advent of social media and selfies and the cell phone. You know, and it's the extent of this is almost beyond belief at this point. But it was already true by the 70s. Don't let the boomers tell you that they were any better. They just didn't have the technology. They were just as narcissistic. You know, you can bet that, you know, and he wrote this great book about it. Now, as a society had been transformed into this hotbed of narcissism. And basically, abusive supervisors tend to have negative worldviews and be narcissistic. So basically, counterproductive work behaviors are going to come about if people see their bosses as abusive, and deviant behaviors, they're going to blame the company rather than just the supervisor. They say, why would a company put a guy like this or gal like this in charge? And it could be a gal too. One of my students in the other class said she's working for a toxic supervisor now, and she's trying to get transferred out. And, you know, we've been talking about the problems. Trust is a very important relationship between a supervisor and employee. There's mutual positive expectations. Both parties depend on each other. Trust encourages risk-taking. Trust encourages information sharing. Groups that trust are more effective. Trust enhances productivity. And the characteristics that encourage trust are benevolence, integrity, and ability. However, there's one big problem with trust, is that if you trust someone and they betray you, you can be destroyed. Okay, and this is the very tactic that psychopaths use in many contexts, con artists especially, that they get you to trust them. There are con artists who spend years ingratiating themselves to people, and then when they're trusted, they steal. They use that trust to take advantage of the other person. This is quite
Your loyal pet alligator.
Say it again.
Your loyal pet alligator.
Your loyal pet alligator, exactly. They're loyal until they're not loyal. You know, it's like, yeah, that's right. Not a good idea to have a pet alligator. So basically, we, you know, I would say in conclusion, I think this material is very useful for the paper, and you can apply any number of these theories to the movie. And so it's, I think the movie is a very rich kind of foil for these theories, and there's a wide array of theories. And I think in the, you know, if you apply them to the movies, it makes the theories a lot more alive. You can see them in the characters. So that's something for you to think about. Now, tomorrow is Halloween. So I hope you're gonna all go out trick-or-treating, maybe not. But before you go, I will take attendance. I don't know what that has to do with the one and the other, but and then feel free to stay or go, depending on whether you want to continue to talk to me. Minhaz Ahmed. Minhaz. Muaz.
I'm here, Professor. I'm here.
Thank you, Muaz. Dana.
No problem, sir.
I'm here.
Thank you, Dana. Karina.
Good night, Professor.
Good night, Karina. Derek.
I'm here.
Thank you, Derek. Zhao Lin.
Here, Professor.
Thank you, Zhao Lin. Naisha.
Here.
Thank you. Tyler Daly. Tyler. Charles DeBross.
Here.
Thank you, Charles. Caitlin Dingman.
Here.
Thank you, Caitlin. Riham Elbakatashi.
Here.
Thank you, Riham. Fatima Faria.
Here.
Thank you, Fatima. Josanne Frazier.
Here.
Thank you. Raquel Gray.
Here.
Thank you. Gabrielle Huggins. Gabriel.
Here.
Thank you, Gabriel. Brian Joseph.
Yeah, Professor.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye bye. Have a good night.
You too, Brian. Maimuna Kabir.
Here.
Thank you, Maimuna. Steve Kaplan.
I'm here.
Thank you, Steve. Selma Kahanam. Selma. Catherine Kim.
Here.
Thank you. Clinton Kenyeti.
Here.
Thank you, Clinton. Ilya Korolev.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you. Billy Kryam.
Hi, Professor. I'm here.
Thank you, Billy. Christina Kuchenko.
I'm here, Professor.
Thanks, Christina. Shanice Lawson.
I'm here.
Thank you, Shanice. Alex.
I'm here.
Thanks, Alex. Ava Luke.
Here.
Thank you. Lisbeth Martinez.
Here, Professor.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Kevin.
Here, Professor.
Thank you. Barbara Mendick.
I'm here, Professor.
Thanks, Barbara. Leonie. Leonie Mill. Thank you. Jacqueline Mill.
Have a good night.
I'm here,
Jack-
Professor.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Judy Mizrachi.
Here, hi.
Jessica Moon.
Wait, you got me, right?
Hi, I'm here.
Who's asking me?
Judy was right.
Yes, I got you, Judy. You're
Okay,
good.
perfect, thank you.
Good to go. Take care. Oriana Mora.
I'm here.
Thank you. Hamza Nadeem.
Here.
Hamza?
Here.
Thank you. Anthony Agoyan.
Here.
Thank you, Anthony. Diana Owusu.
Here, Professor.
Thank you. Sabita Pekiari. Sabita. Okay, Sapir Rafaelov.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, Sapir. Shakira Risher. Not here. Eliza Silk.
I'm
Oh, Shakira's here. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
Eliza Silks.
Here.
Thank you. And oh, she dropped. Anastasia dropped. Were there? Oh, there's one. Zixuan Su.
Here.
Thank you, Zixuan. Nahima Sultana.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you. Rayvon Watson Taylor.
I'm here.
Thank you. Michael Williams.
I'm here, Professor.
Thank you, sir. Bin Wu.
I'm here.
Thank you. Yangyue Wu.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Asen Yagladier.
Here.
Okay, so let me read off. There were some people I didn't get. If you're here, I'm calling off the names of the absent people. If I don't call your name, it's because I marked you present. Minhaz Ahmed, Tyler Daly, Salma Kahanam, Sabita Pekayari, and that's it. Okay, so any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Professor.
Shoot.
Let anybody go. No problem. Anybody want to go, guys? Ask a question. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I had a question. It was about the the 12 o'clock high thingy. So I missed conscientiousness. No. I added conscientiousness, but I didn't mention agreeableness and openness. Instead, I said honesty and integrity. Does that, count for anything?
No, I
If
mean, it
not, I
doesn't
can.
bother me. What are you
Okay.
asking? Like, in other words, you described Savage in a certain way?
Yeah, I described Devoncourt as conscientious. No, I described both of them that way, and I just said that Davenport was more of a charismatic leader and Savage was more of a transformational leader.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Don't worry about it.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Mhm. Anyone else?
Well, Professor, the people got submitted by tonight, right? By 11:59, and then you're gonna give us feedback on it, and then we're gonna have
Yeah,
to then submit it in 2 weeks from now, which is gonna be no.
I don't know about 2 weeks from now. I'll see how long it may take me a long time to grade because a lot of students in the class. So I'll see how long it takes to grade them, and then we'll decide when you have to return it. Okay.
Oh, right. Sounds good. So it's basically I did a cover letter, basically a paper, and I did it 1 page. That'll be it, right?
Yeah.
All right, that sounds
1
good. Then
page.
enjoy your night and have a beautiful week is coming up. Like,
Same to you, Muaz. Nice talking to you again.
Professor, so I
Yes.
have a question.
Go ahead.
So, we're gonna write the paper, right? And then you're grading it. When you're grading it, is it something that's gonna affect our grade, or is it just for the feedback?
Okay, it's in 2 rounds. The first round will give you a grade, but it doesn't count.
Okay.
But they'll tell you how much you need to work on your writing and other things. The second round does count towards your grade. So I don't count the first grade.
Mhm.
You get to rewrite it based on my comments, and then I count it for the second round.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Professor, speaking about it to this point, right? So basically, if I got pretty decent grade in the first one, do you want me to just redo it? Just that'll be a perfect.
All right, almost everyone ends up redoing it. I had someone in one of my classes who got like an A-, and there was one writing error. It was almost perfect paper. And she rewrote it, corrected 1 or 2 errors, and got the A. If you don't want to rewrite it for any reason, I mean, whatever grade you get could be your permanent grade. So if you just want to submit it once, let's say you get a C on the first round, that could be your grade if you don't resubmit it. If you can live with that grade.
No, I cannot live with C. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, so most people rewrite the paper. I do get some that don't. So I had a class with like 30 odd students, a little smaller than this class, but still a good sized class. I would say about 2/3 of them rewrote it. Some never submitted it. Some submitted it one time and not the second, and the rest rewrote it. So about 2/3 rewrote it.
well, that's really interesting, Professor.
Okay, good.
I guess because a lot of us, Professor, we come from immigrant family, and then English is now our first language. Technically, I speak 4 languages almost. So yeah.
Well, all the more reason to practice. I mean, it's a good chance for you to learn
I
it.
mean, like my English is pretty good, thank God. Like I know how to read and write it. I was born here, and then I moved and lived in a different country, so English became my second language. But in this case, I always practices. You know what I mean? I'm being ability to practice different languages, and I don't basically learn just one languages. I like to learn multiple languages, if it makes sense.
Sure, not a problem. I mean, all I'm trying to do is help you to improve your writing, your English writing. Okay, so from wherever you are is where we'll start, and then you'll improve from there.
All right, Professor. Thank you so much for your feedback. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome.
And thanks for answering the questions. And have a beautiful night and enjoy the weekend again, Professor.
Thanks.
Take
You
care.
too. You too.
You're welcome.
Bye now. Anyone else?
Yeah, thanks. I sent an email before class. I just wanted you to know about it just in case if you
Okay,
get a chance
I'll
to
look
check.
for it. I have not checked my email tonight, so I probably haven't seen it, but
Thank you so much.
not a problem. Take care, Kevin.
Likewise.
So I'm the only one left? Okay, well, have a good night to myself.